So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at some really fascinating sources from a single Monday in April.
Yeah, April 20th, 2026.
Exactly. And we're unpacking materials from this massive global event. It's a Monday Bible study led by Pastor Dr. W.F Kumuyi, the General Superintendent of the Deeper Christian Life Ministry.
Right, and the logistics of the single event really tell you a lot about the sheer scale we're dealing with here.
It's huge.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the primary sermon is preached in India, but we also have a live broadcast beam feeding straight into Aberdeen in the United Kingdom.
Wow, so crossing continents.
Yeah, and tying it all together, we have these highly structured, incredibly detailed study notes that were distributed from the church's headquarters in Lagos, Nigeria.
Okay, so we've got India, the UK, and Nigeria all synced up.
Exactly. So we are basically analyzing a synchronized multi-continent deep dive into the mechanics of internal spiritual transformation.
And our mission here is to figure out why this global movement, which obviously has immense external reach, is spending an entire Monday entirely focused on this radical, invisible hardware swap of the human spirit.
Hardware swap, I like that term. It fits perfectly.
Yeah, and to really understand the weight of this teaching, you have to understand the atmosphere in the room, especially from our sources covering that Aberdeen broadcast.
Right, because this isn't just your passive, sleepy Monday evening gathering,
Not at all. The notes describe a super visceral, highly charged environment. You have these specialized choir ministrations, which, for those who might not be familiar with the tradition, they aren't just background music.
Yeah, they're very intentional.
Exactly. They are fervent choral performances designed to set this heavily spiritual atmosphere. And the congregation is engaging in this intense prayer for their pastor's health.
And the messaging right out of the gate is incredibly urgent. I mean, it almost borders on a militant exhortation.
Wait, really? Militant in what way?
Well, the attendees are basically being instructed to preach the gospel without ceasing every single day. The speakers in Aberdeen are directly preparing the congregation for friction.
Like pushback from society.
Yeah, exactly. They are explicitly warned that they are going to face slander, cutting words, and outward persecution in their daily lives. They are being prepped to survive a very hostile environment.
Which makes the transition in the study notes so compelling, honestly. Because Pastor Kumuyi pivots from this modern-day call to face persecution in the streets of the UK, and he uses it to frame this ancient case study on military and spiritual conflict.
Right, we're looking at the Old Testament here, 1 Kings chapter 20.
Yeah, and instead of just giving us a dry history lesson, he uses this to dissect the psychology of how humans just, constantly underestimate divine power.
It's a great narrative. It introduces Ben-Hadad, who is the king of Syria, and he brings 32 allied kings and this overwhelming military force to besiege Samaria.
32 kings? That's ridiculous.
I know, right? He is essentially bullying Ahab, the king of Israel. He demands Ahab's silver, his gold, his wives, his children, just everything.
And initially, Ahab completely caves. He just says, yep, whatever you say, it's yours.
Total surrender.
But then Ben-Hadad pushes too far. He demands that his servants be allowed to just rummage through Ahab's house. And Ahab's elders finally tell him, you got to draw a line here.
And what follows is just bizarre. It's a seemingly impossible military victory.
Right. A prophet tells Ahab that God is going to deliver this massive Syrian army using an underdog force of exactly 232 young men.
232 against an entire coalition.
Yeah. And while the Syrian king and his allies are literally drinking themselves drunk in their pavilions, these young men march out and just slaughter the Syrian forces.
It's a complete rout. Ben-Hadad barely escapes on a horse.
But if we look closely at the text, the military victory isn't actually the focal point of the analysis here.
No, the real insight comes the following year. It's when the surviving servants of the Syrian king try to rationalize their embarrassing defeat.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Yeah, they experience this profound cognitive dissonance. They just cannot accept that their massive army was beaten by a tiny Israelite force. So they invent a theological loophole.
They tell their king, their gods are gods of the hills, that's why they beat us. But if we fight them in the plain, down in the valleys, surely we'll be stronger.
Right. They attempt to geographically and logically limit God's power. They assume the divine has this strict jurisdiction that simply does not extend to the lowlands.
So the next year, they return with an army that basically fills the country. Meanwhile, the Israelites are described as looking like two little flocks of kids.
Yeah, just completely outnumbered again.
But because the Syrians made this arrogant assumption, a prophet tells Ahab that God is going to shatter that limitation. And the result is a staggering defeat for the Syrians.
Unbelievable numbers, too. 100,000 footmen killed, and another 27,000 crushed when a literal wall collapses in a city called Aphek.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you are listening to this right now, maybe you're on a stressful Tuesday commute or you're sitting in a chaotic office, this ancient rationalization is still playing out in modern psychology.
Oh, absolutely.
People today treat spiritual concepts exactly like the God of the hills.
Hmm.
Like, do you expect sudden, miraculous peace right now, right in the middle of your workday?
Probably not. Most people don't.
Right. Or do you reserve that expectation for a massive church service, a spiritual retreat, or a Sunday morning? We compartmentalize our faith.
We really do. We assume divine power only works during those high emotional moments.
Yeah, and we completely fail to apply it to the valleys of just mundane, everyday struggles.
And that compartmentalization is exactly what Pastor Kumuyi is attacking in this broadcast. It's humanity's chronic tendency to assume God's capabilities are limited to specific, environments.
And this ancient story perfectly sets up the central theme of the entire deep dive. Because while God's power might not be limited geographically, humans are incredibly adept at limiting it internally.
Yeah, we build our own walls.
Which brings us to the tragedy of King Ahab. Because surviving a crisis or winning a battle doesn't mean your character is suddenly fixed.
No, not at all. We move from this incredible victory in the valley to one of the most pathetic moral failures imaginable.
Ahab experienced God's power on the battlefield, but the moment the war is won, we see that his internal architecture is just completely hollow.
The study notes actually take us to the very next chapter, 1 Kings 21, to examine the true state of Ahab's internal life.
Oh, the vineyard incident?
Exactly. He decides he wants this vineyard owned by a man named Naboth, just to use as an herb garden. But Naboth refuses to sell, citing religious laws about ancestral inheritance.
So the victorious king of Israel, a man who literally just defeated an army of over 100,000 men, goes home, lies down on his bed, turns his face to the wall, and refuses to eat.
He throws a complete temper tantrum over a salad garden.
Right. Now, wait, I have to push back on the idea that Ahab is just this purely evil, stony character at this moment.
Okay, how so?
Well, if he's a ruthless, absolute dictator with no moral compass whatsoever, why doesn't he just kill Naboth himself right then and there? He clearly feels constrained enough to go home and sulk in his bed.
That's a fair point.
Isn't this more about cowardice than having a completely stony heart? Like, why the massive disconnect between his outer authority and his inner immaturity?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that sulking is actually the defining symptom of the stony heart in Pastor Kumuyi's theological framework.
Oh, really? How does that work?
Because the stony heart isn't always characterized by aggressive cinematic evil. Often it's characterized by a complete vacuum of internal leadership and moral conviction.
Ah, I see.
Ahab's authority was purely structural, purely external. He wanted the land, but he didn't have the inner fortitude to either accept no righteously or to just take it wickedly on his own. He was just empty.
And nature abhors a vacuum. Because he's empty, his wife, Queen Jezebel, steps in and fills that void with just calculated malice.
She definitely takes over.
She tells him to get up and eat, essentially saying, aren't you the king? I'll handle this.
Yeah, she uses his seal, she writes letters in his name, and she hires false witnesses, these sons of Belial, to frame Naboth for blasphemy.
And an innocent man is publicly stoned to death, simply because a hollow king couldn't handle not getting his way.
It perfectly illustrates how internal rot eventually manifests externally, but the study notes highlight a massive theological twist at the end of this chapter.
Yeah, this part kind of shocked me.
God sends the prophet Elijah to confront Ahab with a terminal diagnosis. Elijah prophesies that in the exact place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up Ahab's blood and his entire bloodline will be wiped out.
It's a horrifying, gruesome prophecy. Yet when Ahab hears this weak, corrupt king who allowed an innocent man to be murdered, he actually rents his clothes, puts on sackcloth, fasts, and walks around softly.
He genuinely humbles himself.
And the wild part is, God immediately notices. God tells Elijah that because Ahab humbled himself, the punishment will be delayed to the next generation.
Which serves as a foundational premise for the thousands of people tuning into this broadcast. It demonstrates God's immediate responsiveness to a yielded heart.
Regardless of the past.
Exactly. The text argues that no matter how deep the rot goes, no matter the severity of the past actions, the moment the internal posture changes, the divine response changes.
So if Ahab is the negative case study like the diagnosis of the terminal disease of a stony heart, then Pastor Kumuyi's main text from the book of Ezekiel provides the radical cure.
Yes, the Lego study notes zero in on Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 25 through 27.
And the passage begins with God promising, "Then will I sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean."
But Kumuyi breaks down the theology here, emphasizing that this is not a literal physical bath or just some ritual washing.
Right, that's much deeper.
This is about divine purification. God is promising to cleanse people from their internal filthiness, and specifically from all their idols.
Let's talk about how Pastor Kumuyi frames idolatry for a modern audience, because he isn't talking to people who are bowing down to carved wooden statues or
Yeah.
golden calves, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
He elevates the concept to an issue of psychological sovereignty. Basically, an idol is whatever sits on the throne of your mind.
What's fascinating here is how he maps the human spirit as a literal throne room. When God created humanity, that inner seat was designed exclusively for divine presence.
Okay.
God desires to dwell there and direct the life from the inside out. When anything else takes that seat, money, ambition, relationships, it becomes an idol.
It's like a background app running on your smartphone.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. You can't see it on your home screen.
No.
You might not even realize it's open. But it is silently draining your system resources.
Just eating away at the battery?
Exactly. It's consuming your processing power and hijacking the focus that rightfully belongs to the user. You wonder why your energy is dying so fast, or why your character keeps failing in stressful moments.
Because something else is running the show.
Yeah, it's because this unseen thing, an obsession with money, a drive for status, or even just your own stubborn pride, is running everything behind the scenes.
That analogy fits Kumuyi's teaching perfectly. The character of a person, whether it's their gentle nature or their harshness, those are merely byproducts of whoever or whatever is currently running as the primary operating system.
And if an idol is sitting on the throne, the inevitable result is what Kumuyi calls the stony, Adamic, adamant heart.
Adamic and adamant.
Right, the old nature inherited from Adam that just stubbornly insists, I don't need direction, I'm doing this my way.
And this is why the promise in Ezekiel is so profound. God says, He will take away the stony heart out of your flesh and give you an heart of flesh, putting His own spirit inside.
Kumuyi is explicitly telling his global audience that this is not about behavior modification. You cannot simply try really hard to be a better person.
No, you need a complete hardware swap.
The adamant stone has to be surgically removed and replaced by a soft, responsive entity powered by the divine spirit.
But understanding the theology of the hardware swap leads to the real practical application for the listener. Like, how does a person actually execute this?
Because you can't perform open-heart surgery on your own spirit, right?
Exactly. Which brings us to the mechanics of transformation. Pastor Kumuyi lays out a very specific, actionable framework using 3 F's: faith, faithfulness, and fortitude.
Okay, let's go through those.
The first mechanism is faith that staggers not. Kumuyi draws from Romans chapter 4, analyzing the story of Abraham and Sarah.
God promises Abraham a son, Isaac. But the biological reality is that Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90.
Right, from a historical, biological, and logical standpoint, this is a complete impossibility.
But the text notes that Abraham staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief. And here's where it gets really interesting.
How so?
Because Pastor Kumuyi directly clashes with modern societal norms in modern psychology here. We live in an era where personality traits are viewed as largely static, especially later in life.
Oh, for sure.
Kumuyi references the common saying, "A fool at 40 is a fool forever." Society assumes that if you have a bad temper, an addiction, or a deeply stubborn nature by middle age, those traits are just baked in.
But Kumuyi utterly rejects that premise. He argues that just as Abraham defied biology to see the promise fulfilled, the believer must defy psychology.
Defy psychology, that's a strong statement.
It is. He instructs his audience to refuse to confess their own psychological weaknesses. Instead of resigning yourself to saying, well, this is just who I am, I'll always struggle with this, you are commanded to meditate continuously on the promise of a completely new nature.
So it's not the modern self-help concept of fake it till you make it.
No, not at all.
It's relying entirely on an external power to rewrite your internal code. But to do that, you need the second step, which is faithfulness that strays not.
Right. Kumuyi references Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 12. where God declares he will hasten his word to perform it.
Meaning God's memory regarding his promises is flawless. He remembers them thousands of years later.
And the believer's response must mirror that consistency. Kumuyi teaches that a person must pray in a straight line, remaining focused and refusing to be distracted by doubt or time delays.
By remaining fiercely focused, the believer is actively partnering with a God who is eager to fulfill the promise, which sets up the final mechanism perfectly: fortitude that settles not.
Fortitude requires immense spiritual courage. It is the boldness to refuse anything less than the total fulfillment of that hardware swap.
Yeah, Kumuyi pulls from Joshua chapter 1, where God commands Joshua to be strong and of a good courage when taking the promised land.
And he translates that to the modern believer approaching the throne of grace. Kumuyi is telling his audience across India, the UK, and Nigeria, do not approach God just asking for a slight improvement in your attitude.
Right, don't just ask for help managing your stress. You must refuse to settle for partial cleansing.
He connects this to the teachings of Jesus in Luke chapter 11, focusing on the commands to knock, ask, and seek continuously.
The idea being that if a flawed earthly parent knows how to give good gifts to their children, the Heavenly Father will undoubtedly give the Holy Spirit to those who ask.
Exactly. The fortitude comes in refusing to walk away from the door until it is fully opened.
You cannot accept a patched-up, bandaged heart. You hold out for the complete removal of this stone.
Which is a pretty radical concept when you really think about it.
It really is. So let's step back and look at the massive journey we've taken through these sources. We started by looking at a global broadcast where thousands of people were bracing for modern-day persecution.
We traveled to the battlefields of ancient Syria, watching a tiny underdog army shatter the psychological illusion that divine power is limited to specific spaces or, hills.
Yeah, the god of the hills. And then we examined the tragic case study of King Ahab, seeing how immense external structural power means absolutely nothing if the internal architecture is hollow and easily hijacked.
And we traced all of that into Pastor Kumuyi's precise theological cure. True change is never achieved by just painting the outside of the building.
It requires evicting whatever unseen idol is sitting on the throne of your mind and allowing God to install a fundamentally new, responsive spirit through unrelenting faith, faithfulness, and fortitude.
It is a framework that demands total internal surrender in order to achieve ultimate external resilience.
So as you go back to your day, whether you're navigating a stressful meeting, a difficult relationship, or just the quiet moments of your own commute, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Something to really think about.
Yeah. Pastor Kumuyi taught that your character, your toughest personality traits, and your deepest habits are merely the symptoms, the exhaust fumes of whatever is currently sitting on the throne of your heart.
The background app.
Right. So look closely at your most stubborn habit today, that one thing you secretly believe you can never actually change. Look at it and ask yourself, what unseen idol is sitting on the throne right now, silently pulling the strings? Because until you address who is running the operating system, the output is always going to stay the same. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.